about the absence of a dichotomy between so-called medical and psychiatric disorders. We used to think about a clear dichotomy. Is this a medical disorder? Is this a psychiatric disorder? That was the way we think about this. Many of us still do in terms of our thinking about disorders. Really, the separation is nowhere near as clear as it might seem. In fact, there's a significant intersection between so-called medical and so-called psychiatric disorders. And substance abuse, the nature of substance abuse profile has changed over the last couple of decades. So these were some of the principles that have directed our activities over the last 4 years, since 2007. The most important purpose of DSM is for the clinical process of helping people. It's a manual to be used by clinicians, and any changes that might be suggested, recommended for DSM-5, should be useful to clinicians. They should be implementable. If I come up with a 20-hour rating instrument for all patients, it's not going to be utilized. It's not useful. And so essentially, anything that we do should be clinically applicable. It should be useful for clinicians. A second driver is that we should look at data, not whims and fads, not my, I'm on the work group, I have a certain belief, a certain mindset, and I basically influence the group to adopt it. It should really be driven by data. And even though, and this is one of the big challenges that you struggle with, you never start off with a clean slate. You start off from today. And if I recommend any changes to what we're doing today, then it has a significant impact. And essentially, we said we're going to set a higher, across the board, a higher threshold for change than for maintaining the status quo. Because change means it's going to come at some cost. Because people are using a certain system. If you change the criteria to be applied, it's going to affect their practice. It's going to affect patients. And so essentially, to avoid unnecessary disruption, which change would have, we set a higher threshold for change than not recommending change. And so you'll see that has constrained some of the changes that we've recommended. And even though we've been careful about change, a higher threshold for change, we said we're not going to set any a priori limits on what we can change. If there is a reason for change, if there are data to support change, if there's a rationale, we will recommend the change. We're not going to go and say, we're not going to touch this condition, or we're not going to touch that condition for whatever reason. We will look at developments across the lifespan. We will look at dimensions, because we've learned that these distinct categories really don't adequately describe reality, that there are dimensions of different psychopathologies, and that dimensional aspect needs to be captured. By using strict categories, it might pigeonhole the world for our convenience, but it does not describe reality. We lose a lot of information by not looking at dimensions. And we've learned a lot of things in medicine over the last 20 years. The practice of medicine has changed. The bottom line here is I can tell you, I would not have been on a statin 20 years ago or even 10 years ago based on my condition today. We've basically recognized that even minor abnormalities that don't amount to disease might substantially increase the risk for future disease. And because it might increase the risk for future disease, you treat that condition not because it's causing disability or distress right now, but because it might cause distress, disability, and early mortality later on. That's a change in medicine. This is not something. We used to do that with immunization, but that was the only kind of preventive thing that we did. But this has changed. And so, is this something that we should be looking at when we think about psychiatric illness. We do know that the seeds for a lot of severe illnesses, psychiatric illnesses amongst adults, are really laid in childhood. And so essentially, are there things that we need to begin doing earlier on to prevent the progression of different illnesses? And lastly, we wanted it to be a living document so that the next change does not have to wait till DSM-6, which might be 2030. But if there are things that we learn along the way, we can change it before. So essentially, there's a task force of about 15 people, chaired by David Kupfer, and the vice chair is Daryl Regier. And there are professionals from various stakeholder groups represented on it. And there are 13 work groups that work across different conditions, 168 members in these 13 work groups. As I mentioned, I'm one of 11 members on the psychosis, schizophrenia, and psychotic disorders work group. We also have advisors who we call upon for different discussions. It really is frenetic activity. I mean, if you think about the amount of time I spend on DSM, I would have to say I probably spend about 30 to 40 hours of time a month on DSM because we have a monthly meeting, teleconference, which is about an hour to hour and a half. I'm also on a couple of other related groups. I'm on the lifespan developmental cross-cutting disorder work group. So we have cross-cutting groups that take about an hour, hour and a half a month. And there's a lot of prep that you have to do as you think about all the materials that we have to produce. So it's a substantial amount of work. And in terms of our process, we've also, in addition to the monthly teleconferences, sometimes twice a month teleconferences that we have for just our work group, we meet in person for 2 days, twice a year. So we spend four days together, and we've learned a lot about tolerating the other 10 members in our group because we've spent a lot of time with them. And this was the key. Really a very thorough review of all the disorders in your particular group. We discuss it in our group multiple times, and then we present it to related groups. So our meetings are held in conjunction with meetings of 3 or 4 other work groups that are relevant to us. And so we have some joint meetings as part of that in-person process so that, for example, we're talking about schizoaffective disorders. It's important to involve the mood disorders work group in our discussions. And, that's taken a fair amount of time as well. Well, this just goes to tell you, the kinds of activities we've been engaged in. And essentially, 3/4 of the members of the 168 individuals are from the United States. A disproportionate number of males versus females, about 2/3 male, a little more, 70% male, 30% female. Although in our work group, we have 11 members, as I mentioned. 8 of them are from the United States. 4 of us are males and 4 are females. So gender distribution from the U.S. is perfectly 50%, but the 3 members we have from outside of the U.S. are all males. So that kind of tilts the balance, if you will. But that's the distribution we have. And let me share with you over the last next 30 minutes what we've done, where we're at, and the relevance to disorders in children, disorders that we're most concerned about. These are some of the cross-cutting groups, by the way. So I'm on the lifespan developmental approach study group. I'm on the gender and cross-cultural study group, which we look at all disorders, not just psychotic disorders or mood disorders, but all the disorders, and think about the application of this approach to the whole slew of disorders. How should we organize the chapters that you see in the text that's going to be developed as part of it? And we also contribute to the other discussions that are going on in other